Welcome to the Deep Dive. Our mission here, it's pretty straightforward. We take these incredibly complex subjects, dive into all the source material, and pull out the key insights, those aha moments you need to really feel like you've got a handle on it. And today, wow, we are diving deep into a case that honestly still fascinates and divides people more than 20 years later. The murder of Laci Peterson. Okay, let's unpack this. Because when you really dig into the source material, the police reports, the trial transcripts, all the appeals court documents, you see something pretty stark. The entire conviction of Scott Peterson, it hangs almost entirely on this massive web of circumstantial evidence. I mean, there wasn't a confession, right? No confirmed murder weapon, no eyewitness saying, I saw him do it. So our deep dive today is really about getting into those granular details you might not know. The timeline issues, the forensic arguments over things like concrete and DNA, the whole controversy around police conduct, and this really tangled appeals process that's still going on right now in 2025.
It's fascinating and tragic, really, because at its core, you have this awful event. Laci Denise Peterson, born 75, murdered by her husband.
Okay, so to really get why suspicion fell on Scott so quickly, you got to look at the life they were building, or seemed to be building. Laci and Scott, they met down at California Polytechnic State University. She was studying ornamental horticulture. He was in agricultural business. They got married in 97, even owned a sports bar together for a while called The Shack. Then they moved to Modesto around 2000. Seemed like they were settling down, starting a family. Scott had a decent job working for a European fertilizer company, making about $5,000 a month before taxes, the records show. And Laci, well, she was getting everything ready for Connor. He was due February 10th, 2003. They had the name picked out, everything. It looked like the suburban dream, right?
Exactly. But behind that facade, things were already falling apart. And this is crucial. In November 2002, just about a month before Laci disappeared, Scott starts this affair with Amber Frey. She was a massage therapist living in Fresno. He met her through someone they both knew. And that affair, that deception, it leads us straight into the biggest problem with Scott's story. Christmas Eve, 2002. His account to the police was very specific. He said he last saw Laci around 9:30 that morning.
Right. The details were almost too perfect. He said she was watching Martha Stewart living on TV, something about making meringue.
Yeah, meringue. And supposedly she was planning to mop the floor, bake cookies, and then take their dog Mackenzie for a walk. Scott claims he then left, drove 90 miles away to the Berkeley Marina to go fishing for sturgeon.
He even had this detail, this alibi point. He said he called Laci at 2:15 p.m., left her a voicemail, something like, hey, beautiful, it's 2:15, I'm leaving Berkeley.
But almost immediately, that 9:30 a.m. departure time runs into a major snag. Physical evidence, yes, but really it's a neighbor's testimony that creates the conflict.
This is the dog incident, right? Karen Surface.
Exactly. Karen Surface, their neighbor, she was heading out, and she found Mackenzie, their golden retriever, just wandering loose on the street. And here's the key part. The dog was wearing its leash, and the leash was muddy.
Muddy, which suggests
the dog had just been walked, very recently. Service puts the dog back in the Petersons' backyard sometime between, let's say, 10:1 a.m. and 10:30 a.m.
Okay, so wait. Scott says he leaves at 9:30. Laci is supposedly about to walk the dog. But by 10:30 at the latest, the walk is apparently over, the dog is loose, and Laci is gone.
Precisely. That window, it's incredibly tight. Less than an hour for her to finish her TV show, maybe start mopping, take the dog out, come back, and then vanish, all while Scott is supposedly well on his way 90 miles west. It felt wrong.
And then he doesn't even report her missing until almost 6 p.m. that night.
Right. And only after calling Laci's mom, Sharon Rocha. And later, Sharon Rocha testified she specifically didn't recall Scott mentioning anything about finding the dog loose in the backyard when he got home, which contradicted what Scott told the police. Little inconsistencies that started adding up.
And the investigators, detectives Brocchini and Bueller, they picked up on weird vibes pretty fast too, didn't they? Beyond just the timeline.
Oh, yeah. They got to the house, and immediately things seemed off. They found Laci's keys, her wallet, sunglasses, her purse, all neatly put away in a closet. That doesn't scream leaving voluntarily.
No, it suggests she planned to come right back, or never planned to leave.
Exactly. Foul play seemed likely from the get-go, and Detective Bueller, he wrote about Scott's demeanor in his notes. It really struck him.
What is it?
He described Scott as this strange combination of polite and arrogant, disaffectedly distant, and impatiently irritable. Think about that. Your pregnant wife is missing on Christmas Eve. You'd expect panic, right? Constant question, what are you doing? Have you found anything?
Yeah, desperation.
But Bueller noted Scott showed a real lack of questioning about the investigation. Just this coolness, this distance. It wasn't illegal, obviously, but for an experienced detective, it was a huge red flag. It definitely shifted their focus onto him very, very early. It's a classic case where behavior, not just evidence, really shapes the initial direction.
Okay, so the case blows up nationally pretty fast.
Yeah.
Everyone fell for this missing pregnant mom. And that huge media spotlight, it directly leads to Scott's double life completely unraveling.
Right. Enter Amber Fragan. She sees Scott's face all over the news connected to this missing woman, Laci Peterson, and she realizes, wait a minute, this is the guy I'm dating. So on December 30th, 2002, she called the Modesto police hotline.
And she tells him Scott had told her he was single when they first met back in November.
Yeah, but it gets so much worse. The deception was deeper and, honestly, way more calculated. Amber revealed that on December 9th, okay, get this, that's a full 2 weeks before Laci disappeared, Scott told her that he wasn't just single, he was actually a widower.
A widower?
Yes. He told her that this coming Christmas would be his first one without his wife, who had supposedly died.
Wow, that changes everything. That sounds like premeditation.
It absolutely sounded like that to detectives. She wasn't just cheating, he was seemingly laying the groundwork, creating a backstory for why his wife would suddenly be gone. It was chilling. The police, of course, immediately saw the potential here. They asked Amber to cooperate.
To record their phone calls.
Exactly. They hoped he might slip up, maybe confess something incriminating on tape, and she agreed. She started recording their conversations.
How did Laci's family react when they found out about the affair?
Devastated, as you can imagine. The police informed them around January 15th, 2003. Laci's mother, Sharon Rocha, she later testified that the moment she heard about the affair, and especially that widower lie, she instantly believed Scott had killed Laci. There was no doubt in her mind from that point on.
And they pulled their support publicly pretty soon after that.
They did. Around January 24th, Laci's family announced they were withdrawing their support for Scott. They cited his total lack of cooperation, his lack of communication with them while they were desperately searching for Laci. The whole dynamic shifted publicly then. It went from a missing person case to, effectively, a homicide investigation zeroing in on the husband.
And then the worst fears were confirmed. 4 months later.
Yeah, April 2003, April 13th and 14th, people out walking along the shore of San Francisco Bay near Richmond, Point Isabel Regional Shoreline specifically. On the 13th, the remains of a male fetus were found washed up on the tidal flats. Connor. And then the very next day, April 14th, about a mile away along the same shoreline, Laci's torso was found, also washed ashore, severely decomposed.
And the location. That was key, wasn't it?
Absolutely critical circumstantial evidence. Point Isabel is just across the bay from the Berkeley Marina, the exact area Scott claimed he went fishing on Christmas Eve.
The odds of that being a coincidence.
Extremely low in the prosecution's view. The DNA confirmation came back quickly by April 18th. There was no doubt it was Laci and Connor.
The autopsy findings must have been difficult given the decomposition.
Very difficult. Dr. Brian Peterson, the forensic pathologist, handled it. Laci's body, as I mentioned, was just the torso. The head was missing, arms, most of her legs, and significantly almost all internal organs were gone.
That sounds horrific.
Yeah.
Did they determine cause of death?
They couldn't definitively state the cause of death due to the state of the remains. He did note 2 cracked ribs and some cracked neck bones, but Dr. Peterson couldn't say for sure if those happened before she died or were post-mortem damage from being in the bay, hitting rocks, or even decomposition processes.
There were rumors Scott had dismembered her, weren't there?
There were horrible rumors, but Dr. Peterson's findings actually countered that. He testified specifically that he found no evidence of human-made tool marks or incisions, no saw marks, nothing like that.
So the missing limbs were likely due to natural processes.
Exactly. Consistent, he said, with a body being submerged in salt water for several months, weighted down, natural decomposition, marine life scavenging. It leads to disarticulation, the separation of limbs at the joints. It happens.
And what about Connor? How did that factor into the charges?
This was a really crucial point for the prosecution's case, especially for the second murder charge. Dr. Peterson concluded that Connor had died in utero while still inside Laci. And then he testified Connor's body was likely expelled from Laci's decaying body when her abdominal cavity ruptured due to the advanced decomposition from being in the water.
Okay, so Connor wasn't killed separately.
That was the conclusion. It meant Connor died as a direct result of Laci being murdered. This allowed the prosecution to pursue 2 separate murder counts against Scott without needing to prove a distinct, separate act of violence against the fetus. It tied both deaths directly to Scott's alleged actions against Laci.
So the bodies are found, identified, The police must have known they needed to move on Scott quickly.
Oh, absolutely. The discovery shifted everything into high gear. They had been tracking. Scott actually put a GPS device on his car earlier, though he apparently found it or switched cars, making it useless for a bit. But now, with the bodies found near Berkeley, and Scott known to be down in the San Diego area.
Close to the Mexican border.
Very close. Less than 30 miles, reports said. The police definitely believed he was getting ready to flee the country.
So they arrest him. Where did that happen?
April 18th, 2003. The same day the DNA results officially confirmed the bodies were Laci and Connor. They arrested him at the Torrey Pines golf course down in La Jolla near San Diego.
And the stuff in his car. That became huge news, didn't it? Almost like a character indictment right there.
It really did. It painted a picture, whether fair or not. His Mercedes was practically bursting with items that screamed flight risk to the police and later to the media and jury.
What exactly did they find?
Okay, get this. Nearly $15,000 in cash. Stacks of it. Viagra tablets. A whole bunch of camping and survival gear, like serious gear. 4 different cell phones. And really weirdly, 2 driver's licenses. His own and his brother's.
His brother's license. Wow. Plus he looked different, right?
Yeah, that was maybe the most striking visual. He had dyed his normally dark brown hair and his goatee this kind of brassy, unnatural blonde color.
So the defense had explanations for this, right?
What?
His dad spoke out.
They did try to explain it away. Scott's father claimed the cash and the survival gear were just because Scott was trying to avoid the insane media scrutiny. He needed cash because his credit cards were being tracked. The gear was in case he needed to just camp out to get away from reporters. And the hair dye. Just a clumsy attempt to disguise himself from the press, not from the police.
But the prosecution.
Yeah.
They painted it very differently.
Oh, yeah. For the prosecution, and ultimately for the jury, this was classic consciousness of guilt. Why dye your hair blonde and carry your brother's ID and $15,000 cash unless you're planning to run? It became a really powerful piece of behavioral evidence suggesting he knew he was guilty and was about to make a break for it.
Okay, so Scott's arrested. The focus shifts back to the how. How did he allegedly get Laci's body into the bay?
Right. Back to the Berkeley Marina, and specifically the small aluminum fishing boat Scott had bought just 2 weeks before Laci disappeared. Police searched his warehouse where he kept the boat, and they found something interesting.
The anchor.
A homemade concrete anchor sitting right there in the boat. Scott had an explanation for it, of course. He said he'd bought one 90-pound bag of concrete mix. He used some of it to make that one anchor for the boat, and the rest, he claimed, he used to patch up a spot on his driveway at home.
But the prosecution had a different theory about the concrete.
A much more sinister one. Their theory was that Scott didn't just make one anchor. He must have made 5 anchors from that bag, or maybe another bag. They proposed he used 4 of those anchors, one tied to each of Laci's wrists and ankles to weigh her body down and sink it in the deep parts of the bay, and the 5th anchor, that was the one left behind in the boat.
Okay, so did they have forensic evidence to back up this 5-anchor theory?
This led to one of the big courtroom battles, what people called the concrete debate. It really shows how you can get conflicting expert opinions on the exact same physical evidence. The prosecution put a witness on the stand, Robert O'Neill. He testified that he analyzed samples, and the concrete from the anchor found in the boat was chemically different from the concrete patch on Scott's driveway. Meaning, O'Neill argued, they came from different batches or mixes. This supported the prosecution's idea that Scott bought concrete specifically to make these alleged body anchors, separate from his driveway repair story.
But the defense had their own expert.
Right. They did, Stephen Gabler. And he came to the exact opposite conclusion. Gabler testified that in his analysis, the samples from the anchor and the driveway were consistent. They could have come from the same bag.
How did he explain the difference O'Neill found?
Gabler argued it wasn't about different materials, but about how concrete sets. He explained that when you pour concrete onto a flat surface like a driveway, the heavier aggregate, the little rocks and pebbles in the mix, tends to settle down. But if you pour it into a smaller mold, like for an anchor, the distribution might be different, especially near the surface where they took samples. So according to the defense, the anchor was linked to the driveway repair, undermining the multiple anchor theory.
So conflicting experts on the concrete itself. What about finding the other anchors? Did they search the bay?
They did. Expensive searches using sonar technology were conducted in the areas where Scott might have dumped the body, and they found nothing. No concrete anchors.
That seems like a big point for the defense.
Huge. Garagos, the defense attorney, hammered this home. If the prosecution's theory relies on these 4 anchors, where are they? Why couldn't sophisticated sonar find them?
Did the prosecution have an answer for that?
They did, and it came from one of the divers involved in the search, Jeffrey Bear. He gave some pretty vivid testimony about just how difficult searching those waters actually is. He talked about incredibly thick mud on the bottom, really strong currents, visibility basically being zero pitch black down there, and constant water movement surge.
So it wasn't like searching a calm lake.
Not even close. And Bear used this really effective anecdote. He testified that during their search operations, his team actually lost their own expensive, high-tech underwater sonar device. They knew roughly where it went down, but it still took them 4 separate dives just to find their own equipment again. So the argument became, look, if we can barely find our own sophisticated gear in these conditions, failing to find 4 crude, homemade concrete blocks doesn't prove they aren't down there. It just proves how impossible the search conditions are. It was a way to neutralize the defense's point about the missing anchors.
Beyond the anchors, the prosecution also used trace evidence, right? Like the hair found in the boat.
Yes, that was another piece of the circumstantial puzzle. A single strand of hair was found tangled in a pair of pliers inside Scott's boat. The FBI crime lab tested it.
And it matched Laci.
It matched Laci's maternal lineage using mitochondrial DNA, or mtDNA. They compared it to a hairbrush known to be Laci's. Now, we should probably explain mtDNA a bit for you, the listener. Mitochondrial DNA is passed down only from the mother. So, unlike nuclear DNA, which is unique to an individual, except identical twins, mtDNA can only tell you if someone belongs to the same maternal line. It doesn't definitively say this hair is Laci's, but rather this hair could have come from Laci or her mother or her sister or anyone else sharing that same maternal line.
So the defense attacked the reliability of that test.
Absolutely. They argued mtDNA wasn't precise enough to be a smoking gun. It could have been Laci's hair, maybe, but maybe not. It certainly didn't prove she was ever in that boat near the time of her disappearance.
And didn't the defense have a witness who potentially explained the hair anyway? Someone who saw Laci near the boat.
Yes, this became a really controversial point, hitting directly at the integrity of the police investigation. The defense called a witness who testified she had actually seen Laci Peterson near the warehouse where Scott stored the boat, the day before she went missing, December 23rd.
If true, that provides a perfectly innocent explanation for her hair being found in or near the boat.
Exactly. But the bombshell came during cross-examination of one of the lead detectives, Al Burkini. He was forced to admit right there on the stand that he had known about this witness statement early on, and he had deliberately excised it, basically, removed it from his official police report.
He removed evidence that could have helped Scott. Why?
Burkini didn't give a clear reason, but the implication the defense drew was obvious. The police had tunnel vision. They were so convinced Scott was guilty from the start that they were actively ignoring or even suppressing evidence that didn't fit their theory. That admission that a lead detective altered a report to remove potentially exculpatory information. That did real damage to the prosecution's credibility in the courtroom, even if the jury ultimately convicted anyway. It planted a seed of doubt about police bias.
So the trial itself, it couldn't be held in Modesto, right? The media coverage was just too intense.
Yeah, they moved it to Redwood City, down in the Bay Area. But even there, it was a total media circus. The defense, led by Mark Garagos, had a pretty specific, maybe risky strategy.
What was the core of it?
Basically, concede the affair, admit Scott was a liar and cheated on his pregnant wife, but argue that doesn't make him a murderer. Garagos famously told the jury Scott was a cad, a jerk, essentially. But he mocked the idea that Scott would commit this horrific double murder and throw his whole life away for Amber Frey, a woman he'd only actually dated like 4 times in person. So lean into the character flaws, but deny the criminal act.
Exactly. And Garagos was also really good at poking holes in the investigation, finding these small details where the police seemed to have rushed to judgment. The most famous example was probably the Martha Stewart defense.
Ah, yes, the meringue segment.
Right. Remember, Scott told police Laci was watching Martha Stewart make meringues when he left. The prosecution initially presented this as another one of Scott's lies, implying that specific detail was just made up to sound convincing or confuse them.
But
Garagos got the actual broadcast tape from that morning, played it in court, and boom, there it was. Martha Stewart was making meringues on her show that day, just like Scott said.
So it was a small detail, but it made the police look sloppy, didn't it? Like they hadn't even bothered to check something simple before calling Scott a liar.
Precisely. It allowed Garagos to argue. If they jumped to conclusions on this tiny detail, what else did they get wrong? It was about planting that seed of reasonable doubt by chipping away at the investigation's thoroughness and objectivity.
Even with those defense tactics, the trial itself had some serious bumps during jury deliberations, didn't it?
Oh yeah, it got messy. The deliberations took a long time, and they actually had to remove 2 different jurors before they reached a verdict.
Why were they removed?
One juror was caught doing their own independent research about the case outside the courtroom, which is a huge no-no. Jurors are only supposed to consider the evidence presented in court.
And the other one?
That was the original jury foreman. He was actually an attorney himself. He asked to be removed, apparently after mentioning to the judge or court staff that he felt he was receiving some kind of veiled threats related to the case.
Yeah.
So yeah, pretty dramatic stuff happening behind the closed doors of the jury room.
Wow. So eventually, the reconstituted jury reaches a verdict.
And they did, November 12, 2004. Guilty on both counts. First-degree murder for Laci, second-degree for Connor.
Did the jurors ever talk about why they convicted, given all the circumstantial evidence and the defense arguments?
Yes. Several jurors spoke to the media afterwards, and they were pretty consistent. They said it wasn't one single thing, no smoking gun. Instead, they described it like putting together a huge jigsaw puzzle. It was the sheer volume, the hundreds of small puzzle pieces of circumstantial evidence, as one put it, that all seemed to point in only one direction.
And Scott's behavior played a role, too.
Definitely. They specifically mentioned his demeanor, that lack of emotion that Detective Bueller noted right at the beginning, and those recorded phone calls with Amber Frey, the constant lying, the cruelty of the widower's story. Jurors said those were key factors that helped convince him he was capable of the crime and was indeed guilty.
So the conviction comes down, then the sentencing phase.
Right. On March 16, 2005, the judge formally sentenced Scott Peterson to death by lethal injection. The judge didn't mince words either, calling the murder cruel, uncaring, heartless, and callous. Scott was then sent straight to San Quentin State Prison onto California's death row.
And this case had ripples beyond just Scott's fate, didn't it, legally speaking?
Big time. The case directly spurred the passage of the Federal Unborn Victims of Violence Act. It's often called Laci and Connor's Law. It was signed into law in April 2004, even before Scott's sentencing.
What did that law do?
It essentially made it a separate federal crime to harm or kill an unborn child during the commission of certain violent federal crimes against a pregnant woman. It mirrored how the prosecution in Scott's case successfully charged him with 2 murders, recognizing Connor as a distinct victim under the law.
And there was the issue of Laci's life insurance policy too, right?
Yeah, Laci had a $250,000 life insurance policy. Under California law, like in many places, you can't profit from your crime. So since Scott was convicted of her murder, a judge ruled that he couldn't receive the insurance money. It was awarded entirely to Laci's mother, Sharon Rocha.
Okay, so Scott goes to death row in 2005, and for the next 15 years, his case works its way through the automatic appeals process that happens with all death sentences in California. Then, in August 2020, there's a major development from the California Supreme Court.
All right, this was huge news at the time. What did the court decide?
They issued a unanimous decision, 7-0. They actually upheld the murder convictions themselves. They looked at the evidence presented at trial and said, yes, there was sufficient evidence for the jury to find him guilty beyond a reasonable doubt.
But they overturned the death sentence.
Exactly. They threw out the death sentence entirely.
Why? What was the reasoning?
It came down to a specific error made by the trial judge way back during jury selection, before the trial even started. The Supreme Court found that the judge had improperly dismissed potential jurors simply because they expressed opposition to or doubts about capital punishment.
Okay, so what's wrong with that? Don't they want jurors who can impose the death penalty in a death penalty case?
Yes, but there's a legal standard called the Witherspoon Standard based on a U.S. Supreme Court case. It says a judge can't just kick someone off a jury because they have general objections to the death penalty. The judge has to go further and determine if those personal views would actually prevent the juror from setting aside their beliefs, listening to the evidence, following the judge's instructions, and considering the death penalty if the law and evidence warranted it.
And the trial judge didn't do that properly here.
That's what the California Supreme Court found. Justice Leandra Kruger wrote the opinion, and she basically said the trial judge made mistakes, didn't ask the right follow-up questions, and dismissed some jurors who might have been able to impose the death penalty despite their reservations. This error, the court ruled, resulted in a trial jury that wasn't impartial on the issue of penalty. It was unfairly tilted towards jurors more willing to impose death.
So because of that error in jury selection for the penalty phase,
the entire death sentence had to be vacated. Scott was taken off death row. In December 2021, he was formally resentenced. He got life in prison without the possibility of parole for Laci's murder, plus a concurrent sentence of 15 years to life for Connor's murder. Then in 2022, they moved him from San Quentin to Mule Creek State Prison, where he is now.
Okay, so the death sentence is gone, but the convictions stand, according to the direct appeal. But that wasn't the end of the legal challenges, was it? There was this other track, the habeas corpus petition.
Right, that's a different kind of legal proceeding. A direct appeal looks for errors during the trial based on the trial record. A habeas corpus petition allows the defense to bring in new evidence or raise issues that weren't part of the original trial record to argue the conviction itself was fundamentally unfair or unlawful. Scott's team had filed a massive habeas petition back in 2015.
And what was the main argument in that petition?
One of the biggest claims was juror misconduct, specifically targeting one juror who became known as Juror 7, or Shellnice was her name, though often referred to by number.
What do they claim she did wrong?
The defense alleged that during voir dire, that's the jury selection questioning process, Juror 7 had lied. They claim she failed to disclose that she herself had been a victim of domestic abuse and had obtained a restraining order against a former partner during a previous pregnancy.
And the argument was this made her biased.
Exactly. The defense argued that her own history, which she allegedly concealed, made her unfairly biased against Scott Peterson, a man accused of murdering his pregnant wife. They argued this bias tainted the entire jury and violated Scott's right to a fair trial by an impartial panel.
So did this claim go anywhere?
It led to a whole separate evidentiary hearing where Juror 7 testified. But in December 2022, the judge overseeing the habeas case, Judge Anne Christine Masello, issued a detailed ruling denying the petition on those grounds.
What was her reasoning?
Judge Masello concluded that while the jurors' answers on the questionnaire might have been inaccurate or incomplete, it wasn't intentional lying driven by bias. She basically found the juror didn't deliberately conceal her past to get on the jury and convict Scott. The judge attributed the inaccurate answers more to a combination of good faith misunderstanding of the questions and sloppiness in answering the complex, lengthy jury questionnaire. So maybe inaccurate, but not the kind of deliberate prejudicial misconduct that would require overturning the conviction.
Okay, so that habeas claim failed. But then, even more recently, a new group got involved.
Yes, the LA Innocence Project, or LAIP. A very well-known and respected organization that works to exonerate the wrongfully convicted. In March 2024, they announced they were taking on Scott Peterson's case.
That's a big deal. What's their angle?
They stated they believe there's new evidence supporting Scott's claim of actual innocence. And critically, they raised concerns that potentially exculpatory evidence that could help Scott might have been suppressed or overlooked during the original investigation back in Modesto. They immediately started pushing for new, modern DNA testing on several items of evidence from the case file.
Did the prosecution agree to that?
Initially, the Stanislaus County District Attorney's Office pushed back. They argued that extensive DNA testing had already been done, once around 2013 and again in 2019, and nothing incriminating Scott further or pointing elsewhere was found.
But the defense got a win on that front, didn't they?
They did, a significant one. In May 2024, a judge granted Scott's motion to allow new DNA testing, but only on one specific item for now.
What item?
A small piece of duct tape. It was found stuck to the sweatpants Laci was wearing when her body was recovered from the bay. And why is that piece of tape potentially so important now?
Because DNA testing technology has advanced incredibly since the early 2000s. Modern methods can potentially extract and analyze much smaller or more degraded DNA samples than before. The hope for the defense is that testing this tape might reveal DNA from someone other than Laci or Scott. If they found DNA from an unknown third party on that tape, it could lend support to their alternative theories, maybe, that Laci was abducted by someone else after Scott left that morning.
Okay, so the tape testing was granted. Anything else?
Yes, another procedural win for the defense came in October 2024. A judge granted them post-conviction discovery rights. This means they get access to certain police reports and evidence files that they claim were withheld from the original defense team back before the trial. They're looking for anything that might bolster their claims of innocence or police misconduct.
So things seem to be moving in Scott's favor legally for a bit there.
It seemed that way. However, there was a setback more recently. In June of 2025, just a few months ago, the state appeals court denied the main thrust of the LA Innocence Project's big habeas corpus petition. This was a massive 140-page document arguing that a whole range of exculpatory evidence was either destroyed, lost, or deliberately suppressed by the police and prosecution.
So the court rejected that broad claim.
They rejected that main petition. But, and this is important, the denial doesn't necessarily shut down all options. The specific issue of the duct tape DNA testing is still moving forward separately, and the fight over access to those discovery materials is also ongoing. So even with that denial, the legal battle is definitely not over. 2 decades on, this case continues to generate legal challenges and public debate. It's quite remarkable. What have we seen here? We've really followed the whole arc. Laci's life, the absolute shock and tragedy of her disappearance, and then this long, complex legal road that led to Scott Peterson's conviction. A conviction built, as we've stressed, not on direct proof, but on this intricate mosaic of his lies, his behavior, the location where the body is tragically surfaced, and just this mountain of circumstantial details all pointing his way.
And it's vital as we finish to remember the victims here. Laci and Connor. They were laid to rest together back in 2003 in Burwood Cemetery. And Laci's family made a very specific, very poignant request for the headstone.
What was that?
They asked that the surname Peterson be omitted entirely. Laci is buried under her maiden name, Rocha. And Connor is listed with no surname at all. It speaks volumes, doesn't it? About the depth of the betrayal the family felt. A final symbolic severing of that connection.
It really does.
So if we pull back and think about the bigger picture here, you have a conviction resting almost entirely on circumstantial evidence. Yes, a lot of it, but still circumstantial. You have the boat, the concrete debate, the lies, the arrest, the location. And now, 20 years later, you still have serious legal challenges underway based on claims about juror bias, suppressed evidence, potentially new DNA findings. It really forces you to ask a fundamental question about our justice system, doesn't it? When does a collection of circumstantial evidence, however large, truly cross the threshold to beyond a reasonable doubt? And maybe just as critically, how much weight should we, or should a jury, give to a defendant's emotional reaction or their perceived lack of reaction, especially when the entire world is watching in a case as massive and emotionally charged as this one? It's something worth thinking about.